This podcast contains descriptions of violence against children and adult language and is not suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Hi everyone, and welcome to Suffer the Little Children, the true crime podcast giving voices back to the victims of child abuse and shining a harsh spotlight on the parents, guardians, and caretakers who silenced them. I'm your host, Lane, and this is Minisode 4, Stevie Osborn Update. Don't worry, a full-sized episode is also coming within a couple days. In episode 138, I told you the story of 2-year-old Stevie Osborn, whose death on December 23, 2019 went all but unreported in the media. Stevie's death was ruled a homicide caused by blunt force trauma to the head. The Missouri Department of Social Services Children's Division found a preponderance of evidence that Stevie's mother, Abigail Osborn, had neglected Stevie by leaving her with her violent boyfriend and failing to seek medical attention when it was clear that Stevie had suffered a head injury. The department also found by preponderance of evidence that Abby's boyfriend, Joseph Chilson, had committed abuse and neglect against Stevie, causing her death. The Kansas City Police Department investigated Stevie's death, looking at both Joe and Abby's involvement, but the investigation came to an abrupt halt when Joe ended his own life on January 6, 2021. The Clay County prosecutor called Stevie's dad, Gary, into his office to let him know they wouldn't be pursuing charges against Abbey for her alleged neglect against their 2-year-old daughter because law enforcement felt they had gotten the perpetrator, which is blatantly not the case. In Missouri, the Children's Division maintains a Child Abuse and Neglect, or CAN, registry, which contains the names of anyone the division determines to have perpetrated child abuse and/or neglect. Abbey, a registered nurse, appealed the Children's Division's determination of neglect, most likely because her inclusion on the CAN registry would cause the revocation of her nursing license. During a bench trial on March 7, 2023, Clay County Circuit Judge Timothy Fluke accepted evidence and testimony in the appeal case and took the matter under advisement, granting both parties a month to submit findings and fact and conclusions of law for his consideration. He expected to make a decision by May 8. The Children's Division's attorney electronically filed their submission in April, but Abby's attorneys didn't file anything. For whatever reason, the court did not make a decision until June 29th. As soon as I got that update, I knew I had to create a minisode about it. There was too much fascinating information in the 11-page court decision not to, the majority of which I didn't have when I created episode 138. So that court decision is what I'll be going over today. However, I'll also go over Joe Chilson's purported suicide note, which Gary Osborn received from Joe's brother and has not been publicized before. In the portions of the court documents that I'll quote, the judge referred to Stevie as S.O., so to avoid unnecessary confusion, I'll be using Stevie's name. In his findings of fact, conclusions of law, and judgment filed on June 29, 2023 with the Circuit Court of Clay County, Missouri at Liberty, Judge Fluke noted that during the court's de novo review of the neglect findings by the Children's Division had the burden of proving by a preponderance of evidence that Abbey committed abuse or neglect. For her part, Abbey had the burden of persuasion, meaning that she had to prove the facts the Children's Division used to make its determination were not true or legally insufficient. The judge went over the exhibits entered at trial, including post-mortem photos of Stevie, various doctors' reports and medical records, the autopsy report, and Children's Division records, noting that Abbey offered no exhibits at trial. He went over the witnesses who testified for the Children's Division, including Clay County Children's Division investigator Patricia Roth, Frontier Forensics medical investigator Jim Helton, and Dr. Cree Kochelski, pediatric specialist from Children's Mercy Hospital. Abby's witnesses were her grandmother, Virginia Sellers, her stepmother, Connie Morris, and Abbey herself. During the testimony of Ms. Roth, the Children's Division investigator, it was revealed that the division received 6 hotline calls on December 23, 2019, prior to Stevie's death, reporting physical abuse and neglect against the gravely injured child. Ms. Roth spoke with medical staff and hospital social workers, as well as to both Abbey and Gary. When she spoke with Abbey, Ms. Roth testified, Abbey told her she had noticed that Stevie had a goose egg bruise in the center of her forehead and bruising on her ear on the morning of December 22, 2019, and that on that day, Stevie projectile vomited 6 times between 8:45 and 10 a.m. Her boyfriend, Joe, had told her Stevie had tripped over the dog and hit her head on the floor. Abbey then told Ms. Roth that she went ahead and had a Christmas party for Stevie that morning, at which Abbey said other attendees noticed Stevie's bruising and vomiting, but she explained that Stevie was sick, so she gave her Dramamine and Sprite. She admitted that Stevie's head felt warm and that she thought Stevie had a mild concussion, but she, a registered nurse, didn't bother to seek medical attention. Abbey also told Ms. Roth about the domestic violence incident that happened the night before the party, during which Joe pulled her ponytail and shoved her onto the bed while she was holding Stevie. She told Ms. Roth that when Joe got physically violent with her in the past, she once screamed at him that this was how women and children get killed. She also admitted that he punched a hole in a door once and often punched things when he was angry, which is a huge red flag for possible domestic violence behavior. After the incident on December 21st, Abbey admitted she didn't check Stevie for injuries. On the morning Stevie died, Abbey told Ms. Roth Great-Grandma Virginia was supposed to watch Stevie, but instead, Abbey chose to leave her with Joe despite his violent tendencies. When Dr. Cree Kachelski, the Children's Mercy doctor, testified, she said she was contacted by the Children's Division's attorney and asked to review the case materials and make an independent determination. Dr. Kachelski has an impressive list of credentials. She's a doctor of pediatric emergency medicine and a child abuse pediatric fellow at Children's Mercy, who is licensed in Missouri, Kansas, and Minnesota, and board certified as a pediatrician, advanced trauma life support, basic life support, and pediatric advanced life support. She has also published articles about human trafficking and child abuse. After reviewing a huge amount of documentation, Dr. Kachelski testified, she made 2 determinations. 1. Failure to protect, physical neglect, and 2. High concern for medical neglect. She said the injuries to Stevie's body were consistent with abuse and not the result of a normal childhood injury. She suspected that based on Stevie's bruising and vomiting, the child received a head injury on or about December 22, 2019. And she testified that if Abbey believed that Stevie had a head injury, it was concerning that she didn't seek medical attention. The court document reads, Dr. Kachelski testified that the records she reviewed indicated that the mother reported to multiple people that she had seen concerning bruising to the child prior to the child's death. She testified that the bruise to the child's forehead would have been easily seen at the time and that records indicate the child suffered intracranial bleeding down through her brainstem. She further testified the child had unusual abdominal and inner thigh bruising. Dr. Kachelski testified that after petitioner saw the bruises, the child's vomiting, believed the child had a head injury, and had described prior domestic violence which occurred while the child was in her arms, that there was a basis to seek medical attention prior to the child's death. Dr. Kachelski testified that all these factors indicated the petitioner failed to protect, seek medical attention, and physical neglect of a child. When Abbey's grandmother, Virginia Sellers, testified, she said that Stevie threw up on her during the Christmas party, and that when she noticed the bruise on Stevie's forehead, she asked whether Stevie had the stomach flu or a concussion. She was asked on cross-examination if she didn't want the petitioner to get in trouble for this, and she replied that Abbey made a mistake. Abbey's stepmother, Connie Morris, testified that she also saw Stevie's bruise and saw her throw up more than once. The document reads, she further admitted that the child was quieter than normal and acting like she didn't feel good. Ms. Morris testified that she believed the child was otherwise acting normal. However, based on the evidence in the record and the demeanor of Ms. Morris, the court finds this portion of her testimony not credible. On the stand, Abbey claimed she didn't believe Stevie's goose egg was cause for concern, although she admitted that Stevie threw up multiple times before and during the Christmas party. Even so, she admitted she didn't get medical attention for Stevie, instead administering Dramamine and Sprite. As for why she left Stevie with Joe on the morning of December 23rd, Abbey said that because Stevie was sick that morning, she didn't want to leave her in the care of her 82-year-old grandmother, even though the alternative was a man she knew to be physically violent as recently as the night before. Summing up his decision, Judge Fluke wrote, "On December 22nd and 23rd, 2019, petitioner was reasonably aware that the child had a head injury. She had a serious bout of vomiting, and she was sick or sickly, and did not seek medical attention for the child or a professional opinion other than her own assessment. Petitioner's testimony included her explanation for why she believed the child's head injury did not require medical attention. The court disbelieves this testimony. The court finds that respondent has met its burden by the preponderance of evidence standard. The court finds the testimony of respondent's witnesses was credible, and petitioner's testimonial admissions confirm that petitioner was reasonably aware that Stevie likely suffered a concussion from a significant head injury and failed to take reasonable steps to provide medical attention or an examination of the child's head injury in a timely fashion. Petitioner was further reasonably aware that Mr. Chilson would become violent when angry, and that there was a likelihood that Mr. Chilson could harm the child if left alone with her. The court finds and concludes that it is more probable than not that petitioner failed to reasonably protect the minor child from harm, and further failed to take reasonable steps to provide medical attention and treatment for the child's head injury, and that this conduct contributed to the child's death." With that, the judge ruled that the Children's Division met its burden of proving Abbey's neglect by preponderance of evidence. Therefore, he wrote, the court denied Abbey's appeal, affirming the division's findings that Abbey committed physical neglect of a child and ruling that her name would remain on the Central Child Abuse and Neglect Registry. As a result, it is highly likely that 27-year-old Abigail Jean Osborn's nursing license will be revoked, and she will never be allowed to practice as a nurse in Missouri again. I'll pause here for a quick sponsor break. Although the Kansas City police never received a copy of 27-year-old Joseph James Chilson's suicide note, his brother found the note on Joe's computer and forwarded it to Stevie's father, Gary, who did show it to the Clay County prosecutor, although it apparently didn't make a difference in whether charges would be pursued against Abigail Osborn. In Joe's undated 2-page letter, he wrote, "Loneliness is the worst thing that could happen to a human being. We are social animals, and if you cut the social part out of us, we are just animals. This past year has been the worst of my entire life, and my life hasn't been a cakewalk. The thought of ending it comes closer and closer and more of a realization than a thought. I want to say I'm sorry. Sorry to my family and friends, whichever ones that actually give a shit. I'm just tired of the pain and loneliness. I've been watching a lot of videos on what happens when you die, or what happens in the afterlife. I was scared at first, but what I've gathered is that I'll still be here. My soul won't vanish, but my body will. Only downside of being carbon beings. Don't take life for granted because it can change in a split second even if you don't want it to. I don't want a pity party. I don't want a big funeral or a funeral at all. I just want a couple of my friends to smoke a blunt in my memory on the day of my passing, whenever that will be. I write this early morning Christmas Eve. Another lonely Christmas." He then gave advice to someone named Jake and went on to address his father, who he called misguided. Then Joe wrote, "I hope you find peace in life, knowing that I'll be in a better place. Not feeling this horrible feeling I wake up with every morning. And if it wasn't clear throughout the year I've had, but I will reiterate, I did nothing wrong to Stevie. If anyone actually knows me and grew up with me or even spent more than an hour with me, knows I would never do such a thing. And my suicide is not admittance to anything. I want to make that very clear. The only admittance my death brings is that I've been very sad for a very long time. I'm sure that if I saw some shrink, he or she would diagnose me with 100 types of mental illnesses or diagnosis of psychosis. But in fact, I think I've been more clear-minded and sane than I have ever been." He mentioned his mother's side of the family and several more friends before continuing, "I wish I could see you all one last time and share a drink or a smoke to say goodbye. I doubt anyone will find this or even read this, but on the off chance someone does, I hope it will be shared with the people I've mentioned. I feel like I'm rambling now, but this is kind of like my last words, so I'm trying to take my time. Life is like an hourglass. The second you're born, it gets flipped over and the clock ticks. In my life, I've wasted those ticks, and somewhere along the way, my hourglass got a little chip in it, and it started to get bigger and bigger. Until one day, the glass finally broke, and the sand went everywhere. Well, that day is coming soon. I'm really hoping to be Caucasian in my next life. Being treated differently all your life by your ethnicity is a shitty way to be raised in a cruel, fucked up world. My beliefs is that I'm going to have to work my way up the food chain again. Fuck you, 2020. Just to clarify, Joe was half Korean and half white. He wrote a bit of a postscript addressing Jake again, who he apparently lived with, and asking someone named Andy to travel with his ashes around the world and scatter them where he saw fit. The letter ended, "Last time reporting from the Chill Zone. Joseph James Chilson, November 15th, 1993 to January XX 2021. I'm sorry." I'll let you all come to your own conclusions about Joe's guilt or innocence. It's likely we'll never know what actually happened that caused Stevie's head injury. I just thought it was worth delving briefly into the mind of the accused and hearing his perspective for what it's worth. My sources for this minisode were court documents and Joseph Chilson's purported suicide note. I'll continue to post any additional case updates on the podcast Facebook page, so follow me at Suffer the Little Children on Facebook if you don't already. That's it for this minisode. Join me next time for another story. If you like the show, please follow or subscribe to Suffer the Little Children on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Spreaker, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast listening app. And please leave me a 5-star rating and a positive review on your favorite podcast platform. Visit the website at sufferthelittlechildrenpod.com. You can support the show by visiting patreon.com/stlcpod, where you can become a patron for rewards ranging from a shout-out by name on the show to bonus content and exclusive gifts. You can also support the show at ko-fi.com/stlcpod. Follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram at Suffer the Little Children Pod and on TikTok at STLCpod. View photos related to today's episode on Facebook. For more stories like the one you heard today, visit sufferthelittlechildrenblog.com. This podcast is researched, written, hosted, edited, and produced by Lane. Intro theme music is by Dream Note Music, and all music for the show is licensed from audiojungle.net. For more information about preventing or reporting child abuse, visit childhelp.org or call your area's child abuse hotline. And remember, if you see something, say something.